across India. I am Tanvi Taneja. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. My colleague Nick Harper is joining me from Washington, D.C. Nick, good to see you.
Good morning, Tanvi. It's 9 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. and 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we'll get the latest on the US-Venezuela prisoner swap as 10 Americans are freed. And Russia tries to prop up its aviation sector. Our correspondent has the details. But first, the headlines.
Hamas fires rockets towards Tel Aviv amid talks by Egypt to broker a ceasefire. UNSC vote delayed 3 times. US says working intensely on it. Russia injects $12 billion to keep their aviation sector afloat after Western sanctions hit the sector. Protests continue after Argentina's newly elected president, Javier Milei, pushes austerity plan with over 300 economic deregulation measures. And China warns the Philippines against South China Sea miscalculation, says escalating dispute would bring a resolute response. First news from Israel. Sirens were sounded in Tel Aviv on Thursday as Hamas fired rockets at Israel's commercial capital. In a latest video, Israel's head of opposition and former Prime Minister Yair Lapid and visiting President of the French Senate, Gerard Larcher, were seen leaving the meeting room in a hurry due to the blaring of the emergency sirens. The Israeli army discovered a network of tunnels running deep beneath central Gaza earlier today. The tunnels found by soldiers were registered under the name of a senior Hamas leader. Accessed by spiral staircases and an elevator that ran up to 20 meters below the ground, the tunnels were facilitated with electricity, plumbing, surveillance cameras and heavy blast doors.
As the Israeli army was operating in the area of Hamas leaders in the heart of Gaza City, where the political and military leadership of Hamas is situated, we uncovered an area that served as a base for terror that were located in civilian buildings. With the operation of ground forces and based on intelligence we received under the area of leadership, we uncovered a branch network of strategic underground bases.
The Israeli army also released a video showing weapons in a school complex in Gaza. The IDF said that its soldiers enabled the evacuation of civilian population from the school complex. The IDF also added that its fighter jet struck a compound in Khan Yunis, killing Hamas terrorists living there. Now, top Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh is in Cairo as Egypt tries to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas as both sides assert their demands. This was a rare trip abroad made by Haniyeh, who resides in Qatar. Intensive talks are being held on a truce to allow additional aid to reach Gaza and free hostages. In November, 110 of the 240 hostages held by Hamas were released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners during a temporary truce. Meanwhile, Iraq is sending 10 million litres of fuel to Egypt to support the humanitarian efforts in Gaza. On to the Americas now. Protests continue in Argentina against the austerity and deregulation measures announced by the newly elected president, Javier Milei. These protests come amid soaring inflation and rising poverty in the country. My colleague Nick Harper is in Washington, D.C. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Nick, Milei pushing his austerity plan despite protests.
That's right, Tanvi. Tough new measures from Argentina's new libertarian president, Javier Milei. He signed an economic reform decree, lifting export limits and easing regulations to address the country's severe economic crisis. Milei, who's been in office for less than 2 weeks, has pledged to curb inflation, but has warned that economic shock treatment is the only solution. Latin America's third biggest economy is struggling after decades of debt and financial mismanagement, with annual inflation at 140%. Well, as a result, thousands in Buenos Aires have been protesting against the government's economic shock measures in the first real test for President Milei. Amid police presence, the protesters, led by groups that represent the unemployed, made their way to the main Plaza de Mayo square, a historic meeting point in front of the presidential palace, to demand greater financial support for the poor. Venezuela has freed 10 US citizens as part of a prisoner swap with the United States. It's the largest ever prisoner swap between the two governments. DD India correspondent Mary Trini Mena has more details.
The White House confirmed the release of 10 U.S. citizens, 6 of them designated as wrongfully detained by the State Department. The swap took place in a third country. Before leaving Venezuela, all of the prisoners went through a medical examination. Among the Americans released, 2 former members of the U.S. Special Forces, Aaron Berry and Luke Denman, who were sentenced to 20 years in jail after participating in a failed attempt to overthrow President Nicolás Maduro. This swap comes after the U.S. eased oil sanctions on Venezuela in October. It's the result of many months of secret talks between Venezuelan and U.S. officials. The White House says this is a positive step forward. The current negotiations aim to secure competitive and democratic presidential elections in Venezuela in 2024. Returning to Venezuela is Colombian businessman Alex Saab, who was arrested in 2020 and accused of money laundering. Saab was facing criminal prosecution in a Florida court. Caracas celebrated the return of Saab to Venezuelan soil, saying he was kidnapped by the U.S. On Wednesday, he was welcomed by President Maduro at Venezuela's presidential palace. The Venezuelan government also freed about 24 individuals, some of them linked to the opposition. In Caracas, Maritrini Mena reporting for DD India.
Top diplomats of the United States, South Korea and Japan on Wednesday condemned North Korea's recent ballistic missile launches. In a joint statement, the three countries urged Pyongyang to engage in substantive dialogue without any preconditions. Meanwhile, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has said Pyongyang would not hesitate with a nuclear attack if it senses an enemy provocation from nuclear weapons. Kim made the remarks as he met the soldiers under the military's Missile Bureau over its recent launching drill of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Kim said on Monday that Monday's missile launch demonstrated the military's high mobility and rapid attack capabilities. All of this as South Korea and Japan resume high-level economic talks for the first time since 2016, in a sign of improving ties amid shared geopolitical concerns. The talks, which first began back in 1999, have been stalled since 2016 as relations between the two nations soured over disputes stemming from Japan's occupation of Korea for 45 years. Meanwhile, Japan is protesting a ruling by a South Korean court that holds 2 Japanese companies accountable for forced labour during World War II. It comes as deputy finance ministers from the 2 countries hold talks on boosting economic cooperation, a meeting that's considered by experts to indicate swiftly warming ties. DD India's Chris Gilbert has this report from Tokyo.
This court ruling could develop into a complete spanner in the works for the rapidly warming ties between South Korea and Japan. Over the last 9 months, the 2 leaders of the 2 countries have managed to put historical grievances behind them, which had been simmering tensions between South Korea and Japan, particularly over the last few years, and really clear a path forward to work together and with the United States on areas of common interest. But now these historical grievances have come right back to the surface with the Supreme Court ruling. It refers back to rulings by other courts in 2018 in South Korea, which called on Mitsubishi Heavy and Nippon Steel to compensate the victims, survivors and families of those who were subjected to forced labor by those companies and other Japanese institutions at a time when Japan ruled the Korean Peninsula from 1910 to 1945. It focuses on forced or at least free labor without any compensation. Nippon Steel and Mitsubishi Heavy, after rulings in 2018, effectively said that they are not going to compensate survivors or their families, believing that this was already solved in an agreement in 1965. And earlier this year in March, we saw the South Korean government, a year into Yoon Suk-yeol's presidency, say, look, we are just going to compensate them ourselves. It's going to come from the South Korean coffers. And since then, we have seen the path clear for the warming of ties that have subsequently developed between Japan and South Korea. So now this court ruling throws all that back into question. Japan has protested the ruling. Yoshimasa Hayashi, the new chief cabinet secretary, absolutely blasting it, saying it's totally unacceptable and a clear violation of the Japan-South Korea claims agreement. So again, harking back to previous agreements that have already been made to protest court rulings, but questions remain about what the future holds and if this is going to fray, yet again, ties between the two countries. Chris Gilbert in Tokyo reporting for DD India.
Russia has handed out over $12 billion in state subsidies and loans to prevent its civil aviation sector from collapsing due to Western sanctions. Major Western plane makers like Airbus and Boeing halted supplies and maintenance support to Russian airlines back in March 2022. To support the sector, Russia has dipped into its reserve funds. Russian airlines currently operate 999 planes, partly by importing spare parts via third countries without the manufacturer's permission. More DD India's Dasha Chernyshova reports from Moscow.
According to the estimates of the Western media, Russia has spent over $12 billion in state subsidies and loans to keep its aviation sector afloat over the past 2 years. Since the start of Russia's so-called special military operation in Ukraine, aviation sector has faced severe sanctions targeting major Russian airlines and their executives. Boeing and Airbus suspended the delivery of spare parts to Russia and halted maintenance and support. So as in many other areas, Russia had to develop its aviation industry alone with domestically sourced parts. Anna Panina, director of the Aviation Industry Department at the Ministry of Industry and Trade, said earlier this year that between 2024 and 2026, Russia will spend around $1.2 billion on aircraft manufacturing and financial assistance for airlines. She said the goal is to increase the share of aircraft and helicopters produced in Russia in the fleet of the largest carriers by 2030. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin announced new solutions to support the domestic aircraft industry, including easing the rules of granting subsidies from the federal budget. Dasha Chernyshova, reporting in Moscow for DD India.
Germany will provide additional funding of more than $96 million to Ukraine to help strengthen its energy system as Russia continues to target Ukrainian infrastructure. The German Ministry for the Economy is going to contribute more than $59 million via the state-owned bank, while the Foreign Ministry is going to contribute over $37 million to Ukraine in the Energy Support Fund. The Polish president on Thursday denounced state media reforms announced by Prime Minister Donald Tusk as an anarchy, as tensions mounted between the head of state and Tusk's new pro-European Union administration. The swearing-in of the former European Council President Donald Tusk this month marked the beginning of a period of cohabitation with President Andrzej Duda, an ally of the previous nationalistic administration.
Yesterday, the constitution was blatantly violated by Polish Culture Minister. It cannot be that the lower chamber of Polish Parliament adopts the resolutions, and these resolutions, according to Constitutional Minister, replace the acts. Yes, these are completely illegal actions.
Junior doctor members of the British Medical Association began a 72-hour walkout in hospitals across England on Wednesday in a long-running bitter dispute over pay. The British Medical Association, which represents around 50,000 junior doctors, says its members will walk out again for 6 days from January the 3rd to the 9th. Hospital services are expected to be the worst affected. The doctors are seeking a 35% pay improvement, which they say is necessary to cover the impact of inflation. Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Tanvi, it's back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much, Nick. Nick Harper joining us from Washington, D.C. You're watching DD India Global, still to come in the bulletin. China's cold snap reaches Shanghai. The financial hub is set to record its chilliest period in December in 4 decades. And with lights and decorations, iconic cities all over the world glam up in style ahead of Christmas.
In a world that never stops, where information shapes our reality, one app stands out, helps you stay ahead of time. Introducing the DD India app, your gateway to a world of news right at your fingertips. Your most trusted source of news goes global, goes digital. Explore a world of options, top stories, live updates, in-depth analysis, and more. Stay informed wherever you are. Real-time alerts keep you ahead of the curve always. The DD India app, connecting you to the world one story at a time. Download now and explore the world of knowledge, insights, and authentic.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. Back to Asia. China on Thursday warned Philippines that any miscalculation in their escalating dispute in the South China Sea would bring a resolute response. China urged dialogue to address serious difficulties between the two neighbors. Beijing and Manila have traded sharp accusations in recent months over a succession of run-ins in the South China Sea, including charges that China rammed a ship earlier this month carrying the Philippine Armed Forces Chief of Staff. China's foreign ministry also said that it hopes the Philippines will work properly with the country to manage the situation in the South China Sea.
China's position on maritime disputes with neighboring countries has always been clear and unchanged. We hope that the Philippines will make rational decisions and follow the effective way of getting along with neighbors and work with China to properly handle and manage the current maritime situation.
Taiwan has accused China of economic coercion after Beijing announced the removal of tariff cuts on 12 chemical imports from the island. The tensions come ahead of Taiwan's presidential and parliamentary elections that will be held early next year. China claims sovereignty over Taiwan. Beijing has accused Taipei of violating a 2010 trade deal by imposing discriminatory prohibitions and restrictions on Chinese exports. More from China. Construction teams rapidly assembled container homes to provide urgent relief for residents displaced by a 6.2 magnitude earthquake that hit China on Monday. A batch of 54 makeshift container homes arrived at Taochia town, and 20 such houses had been set up within 6 hours, braving temperatures as low as 15 degrees Celsius below zero. The rescuers on the other side are locating missing people who are thought to be buried beneath a mudslide in the 2 villages of northwest China's Qinghai province. Now, as Yemen's Houthi rebels step up their attacks on vessels in the Red Sea, increase in oil and natural gas prices has become a major concern. Addressing these concerns over any disruption in commercial shipping, India's Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson said that India is monitoring these developments closely.
Of course, we have a vested interest and have been supportive of the free movement of commercial shipping. So that is something that we are interested in. We are, of course, monitoring the developments there. Insofar as I think there was, we've also, as you know, part of efforts globally to, or international efforts to ensure free shipping, whether it be piracy or otherwise.
India's campaign, the Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra, is being undertaken across India with the aim of attaining saturation of government's flagship schemes by ensuring that the scheme's benefits reach all the targeted beneficiaries in a time-bound manner. In connection with the ongoing Sankalp Yatra, the IEC vans reached Panchayat Chaka today. It is one of the remotest corners of Doda district in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. A large number of residents welcomed this van. During the program, people saw video messages of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The officials made people aware about various central sponsored schemes and appealed to them to avail benefits of these schemes. And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world. The Belgian town turned its ice skating rink into church to beat the torrential weather. The ice rink is now part of St. Truden's annual Christmas market, which will run until 7th of January next year. A riveting rescue unfolded on Iceland's Reykjanes Peninsula when Erne Snær, a commercial pilot, discerned a distress signal emanating from the vicinity of a concurrently erupting volcano. With his aviation expertise, Snær identified the blinking light as a Morse code distress signal. Bushfires in Western Australia destroyed at least 2 homes as residents were told to evacuate. It was the 4th emergency level fire in the state within the past 48 hours as the hot and windy conditions increased fire risk and made things challenging for firefighters battling to control the blaze. China's eastern Shandong province brought a record snowfall after days of severe snowing, blanketing large parts of land in total white. Meanwhile, Shanghai is set to record its chilliest period in December in 4 decades. The unusually frigid weather, ushered in by a powerful wave of cold air from Siberia, has spread across China since the middle of last week. The opening ceremony at next year's Paris Olympics could be moved away from River Seine for security reasons. This was declared by President Emmanuel Macron. Macron said everything was being done so that the event, which is set to take place on River Seine in Paris, will be able to go ahead as planned. DD India's Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
President Macron told French TV journalists in an interview on Wednesday night local time that the Olympics opening ceremony could be moved to a different location if an attack were detected 2 weeks in advance. Now, the National Stadium, the Stade de France, is the obvious backup location for the opening event. What the Paris 2024 organisers are trying to pull off will be unique and a first for the Olympics, with the opening ceremony not scheduled to take place in a stadium, but instead going to happen on the River Seine in the middle of Paris. Now, having an opening ceremony on a moving, working river in the centre of a busy capital city presents numerous logistical challenges, from the 500,000 spectators who are expected to be able to line the banks of the river to try to catch a glimpse, all the athletes, all the dignitaries. The athletes themselves will be travelling on boats down the River Seine rather than, as is traditional, with the flag bearers from all the different national Olympic committees, from France to India, the United States, and so on. They would usually do a lap of a stadium, perhaps with 80,000 people watching on to celebrate the opening ceremony. But instead, as I say, they'll be on these barges going down the River Seine, ending underneath the Eiffel Tower. Now, there are lots of other issues as well. The weather, particularly, we could well be having some thunderstorms. Summer downpours are not uncommon in late July when the opening ceremony is scheduled to take place. But President Macron, in that interview on Wednesday night, did say that everything is being done to make sure that everything is ready. He says it will be an opening ceremony with beauty and with art. In Paris, Ross Cullen reporting for DD India.
And iconic cities all over the world have glammed up in style ahead of Christmas. Let's now take a look at the festive cheer coming in from across the world regarding how people are enjoying and preparing for the festive season this year.
A robot artist named Ida to take part in a nearly 200 years old traditional UK festival. The AI artist prepares her lines for Christmas greetings to warm the audience.
I'm the world's first ultra-realistic robot artist.
Paris, the city of lights, gets all glittery with Christmas lights as the holiday season is in full swing. The city welcomed the festive season by lighting up the famous Eiffel Tower with beautiful lights, capturing attention of residents and tourists with festive illuminations. The residents of Tokyo welcomed the Christmas season with sparkling light displays and decorations. The Christmas tunnel attracted crowds, while the festive decorations brought sheer joy to the city. Christmas light displays and decorations thrilled onlookers in Sydney after the largest Catholic cathedral of Australia gets illuminated with colourful portrayals along with the Christmas carol as the festive season kicked into gear in the harbour city. Meanwhile, the Brussels Christmas market served up a festive twist on Belgian delicacies with waffles and beverages as the city prepared to celebrate the holidays while sipping the elixir of joy.
So with the spirit of Christmas to give without the thought of getting, we wind up this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram at DD India Live. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India.